Hello dear friends, peace be with you. You would have heard people say that pornography is a man's issue. But today, research shows us that 30% of visits to porn sites are by women. So pornography is no more a man's issue, it has become a human issue. Having said that, it is quite surprising and overwhelming to know that women are becoming avid porn users. But that gives rise to serious questions which beg to be answered. How can a woman be okay watching another woman be abused by a man, given that 90% of porn videos have some kind of physical aggression towards women? Why would a woman seek to sexually satisfy herself through pornography when her natural instinct is to seek the assurance of love? Why would a woman masturbate in loneliness when her heart is yearning for social connections? How can a woman be okay watching pornography when every 3 minutes a girl child is trafficked for sexual exploitation? Based on what we see in the culture, there is an answer which we can derive for our questions. The feminist groups, in the process of pushing equality with men, have lost the sense of what it means to be a woman. How is that having more sex and masturbating to pornography furthers the cause of women's liberation is beyond any common sense. The porn culture has enslaved women rather than liberating her. So many women suffer all over the world from their husband's porn addiction, objectifying men all around them in the society, parenting teenagers in the pornified world, and so on. Even though porn use among women is a topic that is less discussed, I'm proud to introduce to you Timothy Millington from the United States of America, who has given a voice to combat this evil. Timothy has her own syndicated radio show and does a lot of work in the pro-life area. She comes from a strong Catholic family and is indeed helping many women overcome their porn use by speaking openly about it. So please join me and Timothy in this exciting interview as we discuss porn use and masturbation among women. God bless you. Okay, Timothy, so we start by you giving a brief introduction to your family. If you could introduce yourself and your family background to us.
Okay. Hello, my name is Timothy Millington, and I am Catholic. I've grown up a cradle Catholic, which is always interesting because I think everyone's journey is so different. But for me, I grew up in the pro-life movement. My parents, especially my mother, was very involved in pro-life work, working for the Diocese of San Bernardino here in the United States. And so I grew up with a unique experience of, being homeschooled and having the opportunity to be involved in political, activism-oriented pro-life campaigns. And for me, when I was about 13, I really grew to have a deep love for the unborn children in the womb and knew that I wanted to work within that movement. So I'm a family of 4 and very blessed to have grown up with a perspective on sexuality that I have in today's modern culture.
So how did the homeschooling impact you, Timothy? I know it's out of the box, but I just want to know how it impacted your upbringing.
Right. Homeschooling was a real gift for me for a couple of purposes. One was that it allowed me to have, I think, a unique experience growing up, and that my education wasn't only, the typical math, science, etc., but it was also, being next to my mom and seeing the pro-life work that she was doing and also her real estate work, and having the opportunity to learn hands-on business, event coordinating, lobbying, and various forms of education such as that. Another reason why for me personally it was a gift is because I grew up being a dancer my entire life, and so it allowed me to have a rigorous dance schedule, and school fit in around dance for me.
And how would you say your Catholic upbringing was? I know your mother was fully involved with the pro-life movement, but as a family, would you say that you were a strong Catholic family?
I definitely say that Catholicism was at the heart of our upbringing, knowing, the fundamental prayers of the Catholic Church. When there was a crisis in our own lives, our faith was always centered to the good and the bad moments. And I remember a turning point, really, I think at the end of middle school, going into high school. For me, I was really struggling with those difficult female friendships that I think a lot of young women struggle with at that age. And my parents, especially my mom, really reinforced for me that, faith is at the heart of this. Everything may come and go, deaths, friendships, whatever it may be, but we have to have that strong foundation of Christ to root us in everything we do in our lives.
Give a sneak peek of what you do with the pro-life ministry right now.
Absolutely. So the work that I have right now is that first I'm working on my radio show that is also a syndicated radio show and a podcast both nationally and internationally for English speaking people, of course. And the podcast really centers around trending topics particularly pertinent to sexuality and faith. And so we try to take what's currently happening in our culture, whether currently it's the Golden Globe here, awards here in the United States, or whatever it might be, and it really centers around the issue of human life, gender ideology, and this perversion that has entered into sexuality, where we see the connection of pornography, contraception, abortion, all linked together. So that's what I'm doing now. I also travel as a Catholic speaker and educator, working on these topics specifically of sexuality and theology as well. It's called Trending with Dawn and Timmery. You can find us on iTunes podcast. We're also on iHeartRadio if you're a fan of that, and as well as Facebook Live. We actually record live each week our show so that you can interact online if maybe you're in a different part of the world.
I just want to ask you a basic question. So 50 years back, men were still getting sensually addicted, like Playboy magazines or any other dirty magazines, and for them that was satisfying their sexual desire. So I am just wondering, 50 years back, how did women satisfy their sexual desire before marriage?
That's a great question. 50 years ago, the overall happiness of women here in the United States was rated as much higher. Today, there's, this confusion because as they measure whether women are happier today post the sexual revolution, they're not. And so I think if we turn back, what was the context of family life? What was the context of a woman's vocation? The reality is most women were married when they were younger, very commonly in their very late teens, early 20s, and they had family. There was a sense of both physical and financial security within the home. And what's so ironic, Joseph, is that even today, many women, even with successful careers, still desire that same stability for their spouse, because the people they're looking at marrying are the people they're deciding whether or not it is safe for them to have sex with. And financial security, as well as, a safe environment, provides that security to know that a woman can exchange sexual relations with a man.
One thing is, you said that, they got married earlier, younger. So for women who did not do that, what was the way they satisfied their sexual desire?
I think we have to start by understanding that the way women perceive themselves today versus 50 years ago is very different. Today, women view themselves, unfortunately, and whether or not they'd like to admit it, they often view themselves as sexual objects because that's what they have been trained to view themselves as. Versus 50 years ago, some people might make the argument that, women needed to be sexually liberated because they were sexual objects to men within marriage. But the reality is that before the sexual revolution, what we saw is that women were facing challenges entering into the workforce. Women were just coming into the point where they were able to vote, and they were finding their voice in a society that, yes, was in many ways male dominated in terms of the workforce and public office. But in terms of sexuality, many women were satisfied with their sexual relationships. And it wasn't until contraception came onto the scene that men were looking in other directions and dissatisfying the context of sexuality within marriage. Also, we have to remember that sexuality is something fundamental to the human person, but while men are more sexually oriented, women are more sentimentally oriented. So while sex is important to them, what's important is that a woman is affirmed and she knows she's loved and that she's safe. And these create the proper context for a happy sexual intimacy.
So 50 years back, you said women were more secure and they felt the love from their family and after they got married from their spouses. And as a society, the society was more loving towards women, is what you're saying.
I say that I think that the family setup for women provided a healthier environment for that. Now, we also do have to look, 50 years ago was right when contraception was coming on the scene. So more so going back 60, 70 years ago, we see more of the clarity within family life versus entering 50 years ago. We already had the ability for men here in the United States to engage in extramarital affairs that unfortunately were not making women very happy because contraception allowed for that fail safe if the woman got pregnant versus before most men married the woman that they were able to conceive a child with.
So the next question is the most asked question that I received, Timmery, for our interview. So a lot of women want to know, is it instinctive for a woman as it is for a man to be sexually aroused by seeing pornographic images?
That is an excellent question. We have to recognize that although a man is sexually stimulated more so by images, women are as well. Does that mean that maybe they are more as oriented to engage in physical activity? Not necessarily. And I think that that's something that's important. While women may be sexually stimulated, that doesn't move them as quickly as men do because our organs are internal, right? The way we physically react is different from the way men react. And that's kind of a blunt way of putting it, but that's just part of how, women are more internally oriented and men are more extroverted in terms of their bodies.
So if you could speak separately both on why it is not instinctive for women to watch pornographic images and why is it not instinctive for women to masturbate in comparison with men?
Right. First, looking at the issue of women being interested in looking at pornography, we have to recognize that we live in a culture today where pornography, or what people would like to call soft pornography, and we need to make a clear statement. There's no difference between hardcore porn and soft porn. Pornography is pornography, and it is detrimental to the human person psychologically, emotionally, and physically. With the widespread exposure that women now have, there's been, unfortunately, this lessening of their moral compass in terms of whether or not it is appropriate for that image to be placed in front of them versus, say, years back. Look at the way that we regulated television. With I Love Lucy, for example, it was shocking when not only did they show a man and a woman in two separate beds, but the fact that the camera entered into the bedroom. Versus today, you take us years later, it's completely normal for not only a man and woman to be videotaped in sexual intimacy, but for a woman to walk around naked, for her chest and other parts of her body to be seen. What's happened is that media influence, along with the ideologies of the sexual revolution, have taught women to be empowered by their body, by sexual images, that's a sense of power. And so when you have these images that are regularly being placed in front of us, unfortunately, the conscience of the woman, I think, begins to deteriorate, and she views that as normal. But then she also begins to compare her own body to that of the other woman. And she thinks that in order to have some sense of value, that she too needs to expose or even at times, I think, look at these images. Now, what happens is, as you're aware, and many, I think, of our listeners, so one of the things that you and I'm sure our listeners are aware of, the addiction to pornography is not just it's a bad habit. It is an addiction like a drug. And so that's why I think people sometimes like to talk too much about how men have more of a tendency towards pornography. The reality is that whether men or women have more of a tendency towards something, it's still an addiction that's taking place on the level of the brain. So with the different hormones and chemicals that are released when we look at images of pornography, both for men and women, whether it's the serotonin, the sense of serenity and peace, whether it's norepinephrine entering in the body, which gives the body a sense of stop, be prepared, something's about to happen, or it's oxytocin that's released. And oxytocin, in fact, is the cuddle chemical, the chemical that helps bond us to other people. It's also released when, all of these chemicals I'm talking about are released when a man and woman engage in sex, when they will look at pornography. Oxytocin specifically, just to give you an idea of how powerful oxytocin is, when a woman breastfeeds her child, the mother and the child are releasing the chemical of oxytocin, which in that moment are creating a bond between the two of them. Think about it, how difficult it must be to be a mother, waking up at all hours of the night, caring for this thing you barely even know, right? And is totally dependent on you, and you're exhausted. This is truly the hand of God working through sexuality, through physical cuddling, through physically feeding a child to bond two people together. But when you're looking at an image on a screen, you are telling your body, relax, connect, bond with this image. Then the dopamine enters in. This enters into the very pleasure reward system of our brain. And so what happens is we lose that sense of the thinking brain, and we're just living on our animal-like desires, basically the emotional side of our brain that's instinctual. And so you're telling your body over and over again, relax and connect. Pornography is one of the fastest growing industries, and it's also one of the faster growing industries in areas of child pornography, and entering into things, Joseph, it's hard to even talk about the areas pornography is entered into. But what happens is you get used to a small dopamine kick. You want more of an intense release of dopamine, something's more pleasurable. That's why your average Joe might be a Christian man, goes from looking at a picture of a naked woman, creates an addiction, and next thing you know is looking at pornography with children.
Yeah. So, Timothy, before I go to masturbation, just one more question. Before our interview, I kind of spoke to quite a few girls, and when I asked them about pornography, they said, generally women or girls are scared to watch pornographic images because they kind of feel disgusted watching those things. And I was wondering how a woman or a girl could overcome their basic nature in order to fulfill their sexual desire.
That is an excellent question. The natural instinct of most people is to be just completely repulsed by pornography, especially women. Now, just to give a little comparison, women ahead of time think of pornography and are quite frankly disgusted by it. Men look at pornography, and even men who have been addicted from a young age. I've had a number of friends who have said this. My first glance at pornography, two things happened. I had this gut feeling in my stomach like something was wrong. And at the same moment, I had this sense of awe and wonder. The two, one is recognizing the beauty of the female body. One is recognizing there's something wrong with it. What you choose to do with that is your choice. Now, women, I think, have a strong, yes. So for women, it's different though, in the sense that I think before, because women have a natural tendency to a deeper connection with other people in advance, women inherently see the value of another person a little more quickly. Now, this is no bash on men versus women. Men have the strong strength to understand and pick up systems. Women have the stronger tendency toward another person. So in advance, the woman already sees this is a person who is being objectified, versus the man, it takes a little bit longer in how I shouldn't even say longer, but he sees the person in a different way. And so for women, in their natural nature, have this strong tendency to repulse pornography. But again, with this continuous exposure of pornography, with other people continuously justifying their own behavior in sexual intimacy, and also I would say, Joseph, with the breakdown of the family, women are looking to feel something. And when many women today have grown up with no father in the home, or let's say the father is in the home, and there's a breakdown in whether it's the marriage between the mother and the father, or just in the way they relate to their children. A child from a young age is meant to learn unconditional love from their parents. They learn about God through their parents. But when they don't learn that unconditional love, they're seeking that love in other places. And sometimes the feeling and the stimulation of pornography or sexual intimacy begin to appeal, unfortunately, to this desire.
And the next thing I wanted to discuss with you, Timothy, was masturbation. In fact, for 3 to 4 days back, I was watching a YouTube video, especially doing research for our interview, where Indian girls were openly sharing about their experience with masturbation, and most of them said this one thing. They all said it is natural, everybody does it. So why are we making it a taboo?
So to understand masturbation within the realm of sexuality, even looking at how it interacts both with men and women here from a young age helps us understand. Masturbation is more common among young boys. So say, for example, someone says something to a young boy about masturbation. Hey, you're masturbating at this camp. Someone else heard you in the bunkhouse. They say something to the kid. The vast majority of the time, Joseph, when someone says, hey, that's not okay, the boy goes, really? He's surprised. No one's ever talked to him about it. It's kind of just one of those things that's more common, especially, I don't have to get into detail, but the young male experience is different than the female experience with our sexual organs. And that's why for young men it's more common. For women, it's not as much so. It's usually a woman doesn't begin to masturbate on her own, does not begin to explore her body, herself sexually, unless something has happened to objectify her by her body. So it's usually more common for women who have masturbated, whether it's come after some type of a pornography addiction has begun to set in. Maybe there's been some form of sexual abuse at a young age that she may or may not remember, or with time she's come to understand. And what happens is with someone who's been sexually abused, both male and female, they begin often to try and understand what happened to them. And so what happens is young men and young women will begin to act out sexually with themselves or with other children. This is really important, and I know it's also very upsetting for some people, but I can't tell you how often people years later were able to understand my sexual addiction, my masturbation habit, my pornography addiction was because of a sexual disorientation that took place at a very young age. This can even be spoken of with regard to the issue of same-sex attraction at times. Some young men are trying to understand what happened to them in their body, and unfortunately it enters into this sexual confusion, and it's happening to young women as well. And this is why people are often surprised, but it's not a surprise as well, Joseph, because what's happening right now in the medical field is that even medical professionals, unfortunately, are encouraging women to explore and discover their bodies to feel better. I have seen this firsthand within the medical profession, and I've read numerous documents and journals talking about the importance of sexual exploration. It's being encouraged even within the educational setting, because the mindset is if you begin to discover your own body, you're going to be safer. You're going to be more aware. But here's what's also happening, Joseph. Our education here in the United States, sexual education at very young ages, it is encouraging young men and young women that if they sexually explore their bodies today, they will understand what pleases them and what they enjoy. So here, what I said at the beginning, why are young women masturbating? It usually happens when they begin to view themselves as a sexual object. And that is being enforced from a young age within our educational and medical system, and even in the own home where sexual irregularity is taking place.
And one of the arguments that the third wave feminist group give for masturbation among women is that they say that women, when they masturbate, they feel sexually liberated. Now, I have been an addict to masturbation previously, both to porn and masturbation, and I can tell you that it is no kind of liberation when you are addicted to porn and masturbation. So why do you think the feminist groups think that way?
Yes. So The point here is that these young women feel enslaved by their sexuality when they've come through some sort of sexual obsession. And it's not even just women who are masturbating and looking at pornography, but there are young women and men, but young women who are sexually obsessed because they're looking to feel something. They are a slave to their desire for pleasure, their desire for security, their desire for love, whatever it might be. And my heart breaks for these young women because they know when they've been told, and often, unfortunately, they're never told that they're worth so much more than being an object of their own or other sexual desires. And they want to come out. And the very fact that it is difficult to overcome this addiction is a sign that it is a form of slavery. They're enslaved to their own passions or their own desire for some sort of feeling. And that's what these girls are looking for. They're looking for something. And some of these young women who have already become addicted to sex with other people, I had a 13-year-old recently. I'm so obsessed with sex, but I feel nothing. And I keep doing it because I'm searching to feel something. This is something I've heard for years in the crisis pregnancy centers with young women who are finding themselves pregnant time and time again. But this is something we're seeing with the issue of pornography. It is not freeing, it's enslaving. And when people are willing to stand up and say something to them, when they're willing to address, maybe you see a friend who's depressed, something different's going on, the very fact that depression is a result of sexual obsession, right? Whether it's pornography or masturbation, that's a sign that you are being enslaved by something that's having that big of an impact on your life.
And so a lot of single women, Timmery, they discern their journey towards the sacrament of marriage, and they're looking out for the right partner. So how do you think the addiction to porn and masturbation affects their process of discernment towards their possible spouse?
So the addiction to masturbation and pornography impacts the way that a woman views herself. What happens is she has now subjected herself to becoming an object, whether it's in the eyes of herself or another individual. Now, what happens is you take that mindset into a marriage, that is going to create long-term unhappiness unless she's able to overcome that. Because then what happens? A woman views herself just as an object. She's okay then with using hormonal contraception. That has a whole nother avenue of chemical, emotional, psychological impact. Not to mention the impact it has on the marriage. The contraception then allows the man and woman to view the other person as a means to their own pleasure. And that's where the issue lies. And so, but what happens is she doesn't need a spouse for sexual intimacy anymore. You see, when we are able to masturbate, look at pornography, and have sex outside of marriage, okay, so the addiction to masturbation or pornography, or even, it doesn't even necessarily, Joseph, have to be a full addiction, but a tendency, or should we say an obsession for men or women, but especially women, changes the way they view their partner for a possible sense of marriage. Looking for someone to marry, what's important and what has unfortunately changed over the years is that it used to be that when women looked for someone to marry, they looked for someone that was marryable, someone who provided safety. So in other words, someone that was a good, healthy, well-rounded individual, not with, let's say, obsessive behaviors, right? Someone who could provide a safe home and environment. Whether or not you together provide your home, it's important to see that there's stability in him as a potential spouse. And so it used to be that women didn't surrender any type of sexual intimacy until they had that safe context, because women naturally know, I can get pregnant as a result of my sexual interaction. But today, as a result of hormonal contraception that came about in the 60s and no-fault divorce, we started to take sex outside of marriage, right? We took marriage, or say we took babies out of sex outside of marriage. Today, here's a crisis that we have. So what happens, pornography is a result in a participation in all of these sexually confusing elements that have entered into our culture. A woman now doesn't look to a spouse to be someone who is going to be a good father, a good husband, a good provider, a good team member, right? Men and women, we understand through the church's teaching, are meant to be a complementarity to one another. But no longer do we see women looking for someone that is a complementarity. Unfortunately, anymore, women have very low, if any, standards at all. They're just running towards whatever makes them have some sort of feeling, just like pornography gives them some sort of feeling.
Okay, so now I think we have spoken enough about what pornography situation and masturbation situation is about among women and girls, Timothy. So I think we'll move on to the ways in which women can overcome their addiction to both. So even before I ask you that question, this is another most asked question for our interview. In fact, we had a conversation in one of the Facebook threads. So one guy was asking, the desire to have food, the desire to feel thirsty, were all natural desires that was put by God in us. In the same way, sexual desire is also very naturally gifted to us. So we eat food when we feel hungry, we drink water when we feel thirsty. Then why are you stopping us from watching porn and masturbating when we feel the sexual urge?
This is an excellent question. When we're hot, what does our body do? It sweats, right? When we're hungry, our body releases a little bit of dopamine, reminding us, hey, remember when you ate? That felt kind of nice. You should do it again, because they're survival instincts. Believe it or not, we share survival instincts to eat and to reproduce with the animals. But what makes us different from the animals? The very fact that we as human beings have intellect and free will. This is what it means to be made in God's image and likeness. God is love. And I remember I used to be so frustrated when people would say God is love. You wonder, what does that even mean? But if God is love and we're made in his image and likeness, we too are made for love. What does that mean? Well, in order for us to love someone, we have to have intellect and free will, which means we have to be able to come to know something and freely choose it. That's what sets us apart from the animals. So while a dog might see a steak and immediately run after the raw steak on the counter and eat it, you and I may or may not like pepper. We might marinate it with pepper if we like it. We might bake it, or as most men, when I've talked at conferences about pornography, they've booed me when I've said I bake my steak, right? And no, you gotta put it on the barbecue, right? We even have these preferences for what will taste the best or be most enjoyable in how we cook it, right? Well, same thing with sex. A bull will see a female cow in heat on the other side of the road. The bull is going to cross the street and mate with the cow. Teenage boy sees a beautiful young woman on the other side of the street. He has to go up to the crosswalk, press the button. Why? Because it's a sense of safety, right? He has to safely walk across the street. Same thing with the sense of safety of how they cross the street. Now there's a sense of, there is an element of love entering in here. I need to get to know you. I'm sorry, I always tell the boys, I'm sorry, you've got to ask for her number. You have to take her on a date. You can't just behave like the cow and heat in the bowl, right? And so I think that for some people, they say, well, it's a natural desire. Even young women say this. It's not just men. I've heard young women before mocking other young girls who won't have sex. And I heard a young teenage girl not too long ago. It was a funny story, Joseph. We were at the taking of Grease. And they remade Grease recently with Vanessa Hudgens, and they had the live tapings down at the studios in Hollywood. And there were a couple 13-year-old girls behind me, and the one girl's mocking some girl at school for not having sex with her boyfriend. Well, she goes, well, I mean, she has hormones, doesn't she? She's interested, isn't she? Like, this one girl just couldn't understand. And my little sister, of course, smacks her hand down on my knee and goes, Timmery, not now. But the truth of the matter is this young woman was correct. we do have sexual desires. We have hormones and chemicals working with our bodies that are orienting ourselves to the physical act. But we also have self-control. We also have the ability for love. You see, if God created us without intellect and free will, we would be like robots perfectly obeying his every order. And that would be slavery. Now, the same thing happens if we just act basely on human instinct. We're thinking with our lower parts, essentially, and we're being enslaved by them.
So the next question, obvious question, Timothy, is then what do we do with our sexual desire when it comes up before marriage? What do we do with that?
This is an excellent question. First, because of pornography and masturbation, we need to recognize that there are sexual wounds in our culture right now. So in some cases, we need to work on a sexual reorientation. And that is overcoming any types of addictions or perversions we ourselves might have experienced. That is not possible apart from chastity. Chastity is not just, oh, cute, they're abstaining, they're waiting till marriage. Chastity is recognizing that I am an integrated human person with sexual desires, and that I today can be faithful to my vocation by being integrated sexually in the time that I'm living in now. So maybe you're dating someone and you guys have been dating for a few years. You hope to marry him. You don't know if you'll marry him or not, but you're certainly physically, emotionally, psychologically, you're attracted to him, right? Does that justify having sex with him? No, he is not your husband. And when you have sex with someone who is not your husband, you say you are perfectly okay with yourself or someone else having sex with or within in marriage or not within marriage. You know, you send the messages that you choose to. So here's the deal. You yourself being a single young man as well, we know that chastity is not easy. Whether it's when you're dating someone, whether you're engaged, whether you're much younger, you're in high school, nowhere near getting married. The fundamental attitude is that, you know, our Lord gave us these commandments that are so clear. They're like the blueprint for how we live a happy life, how we enter into heaven. Is it easy? Absolutely not. But here's the deal. I'll never forget this quote by Pope Benedict XVI when he said, "The world offers you comfort, but you are not made for comfort. You are made for greatness." And this is where we have the opportunity to be extraordinary human beings by how we interact physically, emotionally, psychologically, and this enters into the realm of our sexuality. You are choosing to say yes to your future spouse, to your future vocation as, you know, a priest, a nun, whatever you might be, right? By waiting for sexual intimacy within the right context. You won't face unplanned pregnancies without a spouse. You won't face the challenge of a sexually transmitted disease, which in fact, I don't know about there in India, but we found out this summer that we have some sexually transmitted diseases that are literally mutating themselves and that are drug resistant. They're having to take the approach of 3, 4, and 5 drugs, antibiotics at once to try and impact the different cause and effect of chlamydia and other types of sexually transmitted diseases. And it's women who suffer in the meantime. So if you want to live healthy, happy, if you want to have a successful marriage, no matter what your choices have been in the past, today you choose to live a lifestyle of chastity. You pray for the gift of chastity. And here's, I think, the basic element, whether it's a pornography addiction or a sexual addiction, set yourself up for success. If you have a tendency to look at pornography at 11 o'clock at night in your bedroom with the lights off, take your phone, take your computer, don't take it to bed with you. If you have a tendency to start having sex with your boyfriend, well, don't hang out past 8 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock. Don't sit in the car alone. Set yourself up for success.
So when you spoke about chastity being a solution to rightly order the sexual desire, you are no way meaning that it should be a suppression of your desire, right?
Absolutely not. I think that is an excellent question. We're not suppressing a desire for intimacy. What we're doing is we're reorienting it. We're recognizing, yes, I desire to make love to or have sex with this person. Unfortunately, we say have sex now. What happened to saying making love, right? And really, that's what it is, but we turned it so basely into something so, I mean, it's just hard to understand how we've come this far. But you're correct. We're not suppressing a desire. We're recognizing this is a desire. It may or may not be good in this context. If I'm looking at an image of pornography, I should not be doing this, right? If I'm just looking at some girl on the street, it's what we choose to do with that. We either go, okay, I had this, let's move on, or we choose to indulge in the desire. And that's where we can enter in the realm of imagination or acting out and pressuring other people.
And Saint Pope John Paul II also says the sexual desire that you have is merely not sexual. The desire should help you to understand that you should become a perfect spouse for the girl or the guy whom you're going to get married to, isn't it?
Absolutely. St. John Paul the Great's work in theology of the body helps us understand that on the level of our sexual intimacy, our desire for love, it's a desire for love through the communion of persons with other people, and it's also a desire for that love to experience with God. And now I know that's hard. We've got to be careful how we talk about this because we don't want to sexualize every relationship. But what we're saying is the strong desire for intimacy is ultimately a desire for union with God, for union with another person, that ultimately, just as St. Paul in Ephesians chapter 5 says, you know, he talks about the marriage between a man and a woman and this co-submission and this laying down of the husband's life for the wife and her submission to him. They talk about it, and it says this thing is basically talks about how it's an extraordinary, mystery. And it's not just talking about husband and wife, but it's talking about Christ laying down his life for the church. And so what we're seeing here is that we're mirroring a marriage between a man and a woman and the sacrifice Christ offers on the cross, and how ultimately our union, our pathway is entering to total union with God.
And Timothy, so what would be a non-Catholic answer to a person about the sexual desire? What could be, the right orientation of sexual desire before marriage? What would be a non-Catholic answer?
We've actually talked about some of them, and some of that is look at people who are having sex outside of marriage. The impact of pornographic addiction and the addiction that's taking place on the level of the brain, right? So just to review, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, norepinephrine, all of these chemicals create an addiction on the level of the brain. That is detrimental to the person. Similarly, hormonal contraception. It is a group 1 carcinogen, right? And the impact of that on the woman's body is huge, both in the temporary moment and the long term, from anxiety, depression, blood clots, you name it. But also facing the fact of an unplanned pregnancy, all of these things, all of which are trying to be covered up by government mandating hormonal contraception here in the United States, or forcefully sterilizing people. They're trying to take away the consequences. But unfortunately, we have seen an unspoken of deadly killer, right, of sexually transmitted diseases, AIDS within the LGBTQ community that no one wants to talk about. And unfortunately, those are the base facts that should help people begin to understand that sex is meant for marriage and it's meant for the procreation and education of children.
Okay, so some of the girls whom I spoke to were non-Christians. So again and again, sorry to keep asking this question again, Timothy. So what they basically want to know is, so I get you're saying porn is bad for your brain, masturbation is not instinctive or natural for a woman. I get all that. So when I feel a sexual desire and a sexual urge in me, what do I do? If they yeah.
Right, this is a great question. Just because you're hungry, does that mean you should eat? Depends on what's in front of you, right? If I'm hungry and there is a watermelon in front of me, maybe that's okay. If I'm allergic to gluten, for example, common food allergy, and I'm going to break out in hives all over my body and I might stop breathing, should I eat what's right in front of me just because I desire it? No. The same level, just because I desire to have sex with this man, should I do it? Not necessarily. Is it going to be good or bad for me? Well, think about the potential. I potentially might get pregnant. My X, Y, and Z, we just talked about that. You need to recognize as a young man, as a young woman, that you have self-control. And that is what is so important. You have the ability to say no and to say yes. And there is a great moment of, if people talk about empowerment, empower yourself with self-control and empower yourself to be within a safe environment. I think that that's what it comes down to. People believe that they just need to live on instinct alone, and that's not true. You're not a slave to your desire.
So I was saying that, generally when we say self-control to non-Christians, they get to immediately get the negative connotation of it, which is the suppression of the sexual desire. So when you say self-control, what do you mean, Timothy?
When I say self-control, I'm saying you have the ability to say yes and no.
Okay.
That's as simple as it is. You're not an animal.
Yeah.
And so, I think that people do automatically identify self-control with the virtues of the church, but you look at any culture, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, all of them have elements of fasting. They all have elements of practicing self-control in one way or another. And why do they do it? Because it's better for the human person to enact discipline in their life.
Yeah. So women generally don't get the necessary help in terms of porn addiction and masturbation because it's not considered as a problem for women. So what are the avenues that you would suggest for women who are struggling through porn, through these addictions of porn and masturbation?
What would I recommend for women working through to overcome pornography? It's important, first, you have to want to overcome it. If you don't want to overcome it, you're probably not going to. It can't be someone else's choice. After that, you have to start by having some sort of an accountability partner. Now, maybe you're younger. This might be really difficult. Maybe it's a parent. Maybe you're married. Maybe it's a spouse, a best friend who is going to hold you accountable. Because here's the deal. When you have an addiction, you have to name it and you have to claim it, right? That's something that's been very basic for a number of years. Name it and claim it. Now let's start working on it. So have that accountability partner. Verbalizing that you have an addiction is important for naming and claiming what's taking place. We can talk on two levels, but here's what's fantastic is when we look at the topic of pornography addiction, wanting to overcome it, there are resources out there seeking to help you if you will only pick them up. There's Covenant Eyes, which is fundamental. There are other types as well, but it is a computer, iPhone, whatever type of device you have, it will filter out pornography on your computer. You can still go and look at pornography too, but if you shut it off, it's going to send an alert to your accountability partner that you shut off the filter, preventing you from looking at pornography. Excellent accountability partner. So not only do you know how the level of the software preventing you, if you shut off that software, it's going to notify whoever you set that accountability partner up to be. And there's that next level of shame. What's great about this is that we're rediscovering the natural sense of shame that took place in the garden with Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve were perfectly okay being naked in the garden, right? They walked with God in the garden. They spoke to him. Post-fall, the first thing they do upon talking to God is they start hiding from him when he comes down and offers them the opportunity to claim what they did. They don't claim it. Adam blames Eve, which goes against the fact that he has intellect and free will. He blames someone else, right? She chooses to eat the fruit. She had self-control as well, but then they start covering up their vital organs because before, the spousal meaning of the body was clear when they were naked in the garden. They understood, I am made to be with you, you are made to be with me, but they didn't objectify each other. Post-fall, they understood that I can take advantage of you not only by physically engaging with you, by actually just looking at you, and you can do the same towards me, right? And so this is where beginning to understand that this filtration software and that sense of shame that Adam and Eve had in the garden enters into having an accountability partner. You also you have to maybe take steps. For some people, they've needed to go to psychologists because maybe there is a sexual abuse or something else going on as well. Pornography in and of itself, I know many people who have sought out good, wholesome Catholic psychologists, among others. Also, you need to go running to the sacraments of the church. We are Catholic, and we were given the sacraments for a reason, and a sacrament of reconciliation, no matter what the sin is that you have committed, offers you the opportunity for your sins to be blotted out by the blood of the Lamb, of that sacrifice of Christ on the cross. St. Paul talks about how we can be a new creation in Christ. At our baptism, we are made new. In the confessional, we are made new. Now we need to continue to work on reuniting ourselves to Christ in his sacraments of reconciliation in the Eucharist. Maybe you can go to communion a couple times a week, right? Daily Mass, even if it's just 1 or 2 times. That continued reorientation to what is true and what is real, which is God, is so important for our lives. And this is where, Joseph, we begin to understand the gift of self. Adam and Eve, naked before each other in the garden pre-fall, understood, I am made to be a gift to you and you to me. Not to use you to obtain something, but to truly be a gift. And so, when we turn to Christ on the cross, who is the perfect example of life-giving, self-giving love, that with practical and environmental changes will help us to overcome any type of pornography addiction.
Yeah, I actually overcame my porn addiction through the sacraments, the grace that I received through the sacraments. So and and I made this up for our particular interview, Timothy, and I want to know what you think about it. For a man to overcome porn addiction, he has to start seeing women with respect. And for a woman to overcome porn addiction, she has to start seeing herself with respect.
That is fantastic, Joseph. I was writing down the same thing. I think the issue with pornography is that women begin to subject themselves. It's more common with men. When men look at pornography, they begin to subject others. And so you saying that, Joseph, is so fantastic, because what it points to is the fact that women have to regain their sense of self-esteem in order to overcome a pornography addiction. So I think that would be my last point in saying, prayer, filtration software, accountability partner, but you need to work through this to recognize you are called to be a child of God. Jesus, there's a reason over and over in his preaching in the Gospels, he talks about us becoming like little children. We have, at least me personally in my life right now, I've grown to just adore the person of the Trinity of God the Father, recognizing I'm a child before God. And there's this, our Father who art in heaven, praying, these different prayers, this abandoning into the Father's hand. There's self-worth there, and I think that's what a lot of young women are looking for.
Last question, Timothy. So what is the one thing that you would like to say to all the women who think it is impossible to overcome this addiction and who are feeling miserable about it?
If anyone is thinking for some reason that they cannot overcome any type of sexual obsession, especially to pornography, know that you're worth so much more than that. I think the world constantly wants us to believe that we are what we do, but we are human beings. We're not human doings, right? And there is worth in just the fact of being you and choosing to be the best person you can be. And don't allow that to be something cliche. Allow it to transform the choices you make on a daily basis.
So Timothy, I should say that for the past 2 years I have lived my life porn free and not being addicted to masturbation. So I know the joy and the satisfaction and the peace and the overall change that overcoming these addictions can bring into your life. And it is through overcoming that I have identified my life's purpose. So I know what the work that you do in the area of pro-life and especially porn addiction and masturbation for women. I think you're doing a great work. So thank you for taking the time to do this interview. I really appreciate that, Timothy.
Of course, Joseph, and thank you. Continue to share your testimony because what you're doing is truly changing the sexual landscape of our culture right now. Oh, God bless you. You are in my prayers.